Good evening to everyone who has joined us today. My name is Michelle Barry, the founder of Women Lift Health and director of the Stanford University Center for Innovation in Global Health. I'm delighted to be the moderator for today's session, where we'll discuss the role that gender plays in the media, why it matters, including for health, and ways in which women's representation in the media varies widely around the world, and how we can make a difference and drive change. Women Lift Health was founded because the world is facing unprecedented global health challenges, and I believed addressing them required diversity in leadership, including women. As many of you know, women make up 70% of the global health workforce and yet represent less than 30% of leadership. This disparity has a significant impact on our ability to reach our health goals. Women Lift Health aims to advance women leadership in health by placing 3,500 women in leadership positions over the next 10 years. And as a result, hopefully to transform health outcomes. When we think about health, we may not immediately think about the media, even though it is indeed one of the most powerful forces in our work. The media helps shape how we are perceived, how we often see ourselves, and can influence how we act. Like many other fields, the media suffers from gender inequalities. According to the most recent Global Media Monitoring Project report, the number of women newsmakers has held steady at just under 25% over the past decade. And as you know, COVID-19 is exacerbating a host of inequalities, and this emergency is playing out on gendered lines in this sector as well. For instance, when widening the net to include academic journals, a different form of media, we found that women scientists are submitting fewer papers. And in a recent analysis we published in Lancet, women make up only a third of senior or first authors who have published research on COVID-19 since the beginning of the pandemic. This represents a drop of almost 25% productivity from pre-COVID publishing. When male voices and experts dominate the public narrative, it can affect what is reported on and what issues are headlined either overtly or by implicit bias. We'll discuss gender equality in media today and why it matters for women to have leadership roles in this field. Before introducing our speakers, I'm just going to go over a few housekeeping items. Please remember to use the chat function to pose questions. We hope this will generate a very provocative Q&A at the end. The session will be recorded and made available on our website and social channels. And finally, please follow us on Twitter at Women Lift Health and feel free to tag us with questions or comments about today's event. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome our speakers. Anne Mowathi is the Africa Health Editor at BBC. Anne, she's currently piloting a new program highlighting women on the front lines of COVID-19. Laurie Garrett is a Pulitzer Prize winning author and science writer, and she continues to do health reporting on the pandemic for a number of outlets. And Nuba Bansley is the former executive editor at CNN-IBN in India, and is the current founder of the digital outlet Newsworthy. Thank you all for being here today. So I'd like to put my first question to Anne. Anne, and I love the purple background. Can you help contextualize this particular moment for us in Africa? We know that women have been disproportionately impacted by the pandemic in a number of ways, from increases in unpaid care work to higher rates of unemployment, particularly in the informal sector, as we talked about earlier. Have you seen COVID-19 have an impact on the media in Africa? And has it had any particular impact on women?
Okay, I will look at the impact in two ways. Internally, meaning what media houses have had to go through, and externally in terms of the work that the media is doing in regard to the pandemic. This is a very difficult phase for media houses in Africa and even other parts of the world. Like in other industries, people have lost jobs. That has been overwhelming for most of my colleagues in the industry. And that is just one of the challenges. The key one for me is women representation in the media during the pandemic. the pandemic is further deepening pre-existing inequalities. It is not surprising that male voices still dominate media content at this time. If we were to cover these stories widely about COVID-19, what would we see or say? For me, this is the time to contextualize the health impact of COVID-19 on women and girls, because it is very specific, this kind of impact. When you look at access to healthcare services now, it is restricted, not because they wouldn't receive the services, but because there is fear that if they go to health facilities, they may be exposed. What does that mean for especially reproductive healthcare services, for instance? An increasing number of women will be delivering at home without assistance. Women may not have access to contraceptives, among other challenges. And when you look at the healthcare provision itself, who are the majority doing most of the work in hospitals, in health centers? Women, actually. It is estimated that 70% of women make up health workforce, be it in nursing, they are the midwives, and even community healthcare workers. Those are the women on the front line of this pandemic and are more likely to be exposed. So when we discuss the impact of COVID-19 on women, it is very specific, and we have to be deliberate to use the gender lens. Then there is the economic impact on women. Lockdowns are catastrophic in a continent where majority of the women are working in the informal sector, like we previously discussed. That basically means a woman who thrived by selling her wares in the market cannot continue to do that now. That is a direct impact on the woman. When you look at other sectors, like in the hospitality industry, it is women who are impacted. And for me as a journalist, I would like to see more people, more journalists being deliberate about how they report women, the impact of COVID-19 on women. It has to be specific. We have to use a gender lens.
Thank you. Lori, I'm going to turn to you. And by the way, just a comment, Anne, you're absolutely right about 70% of the frontline workers being healthcare workers. I just looked up the statistics. When you look at who's been infected, it's actually, if you look at those healthcare workers, 60% of them are women. Those are the ones that are getting infected. So that is not a very openly told story. Lori, you've been a science journalist and author for many years. Have you seen women's role in the US media? Give us the US perspective. How has that role evolved?
Well, Michelle, first of all, the newsroom is me here. So the newsroom under COVID is everybody's home office, everybody's living room, dining room, wherever it is, they're able to carve out space to work. I, for example, am now speaking to you on the same camera that I use to do my news reports on MSNBC. And in the same environment, which I can't control, which is that my neighbor is using a giant drill to knock down a steel beam, making huge noise in the background. And we have more and more women trying to be part of the workforce, including as journalists, with children running around behind them and the dog barking and on and on and on. So there is that. The second thing that is essential to understand about the American experience that is not unique to the United States, but I think is worse in the United States than anywhere else, is that journalism itself is falling apart. Its financing is ludicrous. We have almost no advertising revenue anymore. It began when all aspects of what was called classified advertising, meaning, somebody wants to sell their car and they would take out a tiny advert that said, 1966 Toyota, blah, blah, blah. All of that has moved to Craigslist and other online digital outlets. So every newspaper in America lost what was basically the number one source of funding, classified ads. And then as businesses have gone under with COVID, almost all other advertising is disappearing. And so this is affecting everything, whether it's radio, TV, online digital outlets, newspapers, they're all losing money, just hemorrhaging. And as a result, I'm looking now at just today's list, just today on Pointer online of layoffs and furloughs in the news industry. And this runs for 32 pages. 32 pages of people who've lost their jobs in the United States. This is print, this is magazines, this is television, it's everything. So the first thing you have to understand is that the industry is in crisis, that more and more Americans have shifted their sense of where to get news from let's all go together and sit down at 6:30 in the evening and watch Walter Cronkite and then pick up the Los Angeles Times, to let's go online and just randomly scan and just see what we come up with. And then here's my Instagram and look what just came in on TikTok. And while I'm at it, a friend just sent me this and I don't even know what the source is, etc. And because of this, we're really in a crisis when it comes to the COVID pandemic, because people can't tell the reliability of the information they're receiving. Is it hydroxychloroquine that cures this disease or not? Today, the President of the United States, just last night, while the Democratic Convention was going on, the President held a press conference and said he believes that scientists are in a conspiracy to block convalescent plasma therapy. This is the other aspect of the American crisis, which is that we have a fire hose of information coming at us every day, and most of it is garbage coming from the top level, from the White House, from our Department of Health and Human Services, from the very people that ought to be the voices of reason and rationality. And our normal sources of reason and rationality have basically been muzzled so that we don't have information from them. So where we are now with women in journalism is you can't separate it from the crisis overall. I just think it's quite artificial to do so. However, just for the sake of this conversation, I will run a few data points by you because I can tell Michelle is getting angry. So first of all, about a third of all working newsroom journalists, that's reporters, editors, photojournalists, video editors, broadcasters, anchors, etc. About a third in the United States are female. That's been stagnant for quite some time. We had a huge surge in women in the industry that went so that it went from like 5% up to a third, and then it's just stayed there. This does not reflect who's going into journalism as a chosen field. That's about 2/3 female. If you look at journalism schools and entry-level employment, what happens? Why are they not still there? Forbes did a survey, what are the most stressful occupations on earth? And journalism ranked the 6th most stressful profession on the planet. If you're trying to raise children and you're trying to cover a story that entails getting up at 5 a.m, chasing around some politicians all day long, then coming back at 5 p.m. to try and go over your notes and write your story, and maybe by midnight you collapse and then you repeat again tomorrow, not very many women can raise a family and do that. Very few men can do that. I mean, it's really stressful. If you add to that death threats, I've had my share, people claiming that you're a liar, constantly trying to tear you to pieces. I think women take it much harder than men. Some men actually relish it. They like getting into these sort of virtual fights with people who claim that they're liars and so on. But I think for a lot of women, it's very hard to take, the 25 emails that come in and that begin with "you fat ... or "you ugly ... because that's how you insult women, right? You don't start an insult to men with "you fat." You start with "you idiot." And so I think a lot of women get to a certain point in their career and then change. And one of the things they change to is public relations. So if you look at the field of public relations, it's overwhelmingly female. It's, 80, 90% women. And often the executives in public relations are women as well. But in hard daily news, whether it's science journalism where I sit, geopolitics where I used to sit, covering the White House, wherever, it's a very, very stressful, and pay is going down. so many on furlough. Most of my colleagues are earning less in journalism today than they were 20 years ago. So the opposite trajectory with age that most other professions show, simply because it's in deep trouble. And then one final note with COVID, not only has that hastened the loss of advertising revenue, it's also caused a huge shift in where people are going for information. So for example, I don't know how this is in India and Kenya. I think it's probably somewhat similar in certain cities. The majority of podcast listening and radio listening is in the car, is when people are moving from one place to another. Well, with the lockdowns, people aren't in cars. So for example, our national public radio has lost 35% of its listeners in just 4 months' time. Most radio is now in total crisis all over America. Podcast listening has plummeted because of the loss of people just sitting in cars. And that's going to have lasting impacts, because these were industries that were already kind of on shaky ground to begin with. And as you furlough those workers, these are skilled personnel. They're not going to sit around waiting for another job. They're going to go to a different profession. They're going to take their skills in a new way, and you can't simply, boom, reconstitute.
Thank you, Lori. Anuba. And Lori, you always have a lively perspective. Thank you. Anuba, let's turn to India and back to the present moment, and maybe a less stressful moment. Why does gender representation in the media matter there, as the world is confronting a health emergency in India and South Asia?
I'm going to take a little bit of what Lori and Anne said. It's a well-known fact. The media industry, like any other industry worldwide, in India as well, is going through the same problems. Shrinking, job losses, lack of budgets for reportage extremely low, and just the pandemic itself also leading to a whole host of problems in terms of being out in the field, being in proximity of your subjects, doing that reporting. As Lori said, everyone's sort of study is now their room. I report from here, I shoot from here, I broadcast from here. So that's one aspect of the problem, which is the structural problem of the media. The other aspect that I've often seen in my career is that beats like education, beats like public health, climate change, are broadly often seen as these soft beats. Often you'll always find women journalists sort of being given this either as their primary beat or the allied beat. And hey, now you have a global pandemic where you're finding a whole host of women journalists, at least in my part of the world and a whole lot of South Asia, being foregrounded. They're, in a way, in many, many outfits, digital and mainstream, actually leading reportage of the pandemic. Now, what happens when you have women journalists, women reporters, public health reporters, etc., trying to foreground reportage in a particular manner, but the structure of the newsroom is both getting disjointed for economic reasons, but also the newsroom is not the place, as Lori said, it was many, many years ago. In India, there is a problem as soon as you drop the word gender, because we think it's an obligation. It's mainstreaming gender is a slogan. It's not something we do intrinsically. This particular global pandemic has shown us that a pandemic never impacts people equally. Women, gender minorities, vulnerable communities, indigenous people. In India, an entire migration happened from our cities to our villages and now back to our cities. That happened because the media's focus has never been on any of these communities. I'm making a broad statement, and of course there'll be pockets of good work being done, but I'm sort of casting like a broad lens just for an understanding of your audience. We've not invested in reportage of rural India. So now you have a situation where there is a global pandemic, and a reportage of it is, I hate to say it, but reportage of it is so urban centric. Of course, we need to focus on women having to, spend time in both taking care of their families and doing work and sitting in rooms. But we also have to realize that women also have been spending their time in factory floors. Women in the villages don't have access to reproductive health. with a lockdown, you're going to realize raw material for many of these medicines is not come. You're going to have a huge shortage of that. Apart from that, as you said, in India, there's a fascinating story. For years and years, we've been shouting, our public health force is called, has a whole host of women, and the sort of the foot soldiers of that are called ASHA workers. The word ASHA stands for Accredited Social Health Activists. They're essentially rural women who go village to village, immunizing, giving reproductive health care. For years and years, no one has actually looked at them because they're still considered volunteers. This is caregiving work. This doesn't have to be paid. This is on stipend. And today you're relying on those women to actually take forward your messaging on social distancing, on wearing a mask, on what to do, on identifying. Now, it's a great intersection because the media has never spent any time covering any of these issues. They were always considered these soft beats, and suddenly you need to get in all the expertise you can. So it's a coming together of many, many threads. And I've never looked at myself as a women journalist, but that's also because I come from a particular point of privilege. The newsroom is an unequal place in many parts of the world and in India as well. And in India, there are other factors of caste and class that come in. We're all sort of coming in from English speaking. Our regional media is a very, very different place.
Anuba, thanks. Before I move on to the next question, I'd like to throw this back to Lori and to Anne. And do you see in Africa this what Anuba is describing as soft beats being attributed or women asked to take them? And Lori, do you see that in the US? Anne, you want to start?
Yes, I could start. Yes, there's a lot of it in media houses. I remember when I started journalism, my first assignments were more the so-called soft bits, where you'll be doing a feature story on something. Apparently here, climate change is not seen as a soft bit, but soft bits are seen as those that women can go and take long in doing the stories, and because they cannot weather the storm in newsrooms. And for me, that has been a very uncomfortable place, because it has meant that women's voices continue to be muffled and I continue to be pushed at a corner. So I've been very lucky to also work in places where I have put myself forth and I have been given that space to do what I wanted to do. But I have seen, I remember Lori mentioning this, I have seen my very good friends pushed out of the industry because they could just not take the pressure anymore. The constant reminder of you as a woman and your womb, you're always being reminded, oh, women, you're going to get pregnant and you're going to take maternity leave. And I remember one good friend of mine being insulted that, you're not the first woman to give birth. That for me cut deep, because we want it all. We shouldn't be punished for wanting a career, wanting a family. We want it all. So can media houses be accommodating? I think that's a challenge that we need to rise up to.
I agree completely about the soft beat, hard beat thing. When I first started out in science reporting, and the first place I went was I moved to Africa, to Lusaka, to deliberately pick a center for reporting that would be extremely difficult for Americans to have any interest, And it was during the times of the frontline states when apartheid was in the rule of law in South Africa, and there were liberation movements all over the continent. And what I saw was that there were very few female journalists from anywhere in the world, and certainly none like myself trying to work alone as a freelancer. And you spent a lot of time not just fighting bias, but literally fighting the guys off so that you were safe. And over the years, I've seen this all transform. So when I came back and went into science as my beat, there was really only one woman who was a prominent science reporter at the time, Christine Russell at the Washington Post. And fortunately, I had David Perlman of the San Francisco Chronicle as one of my mentors, and he didn't have a sexist bone in his body. And he was very eager to promote and assist women in making it in the field. But for years, the National Association of Science Writers was all male. And if you looked at other key beats, where did the men go? They covered the White House, they covered Congress, they got the financial beat, they got sports. And where did women go? Health, which I hate being called a health reporter. I never use that term. Only other people call me that because it's a pejorative. It's a negative. You are treated like scum if you're a health reporter. I'm a science reporter. But one of the reasons I'm so strongly reacted to it is because it's a female niche. Fashion is a female niche, cooking, all the household things, education, because of course men somehow don't care whether or not their kids can read. But all the hard stuff, that's for guys. Now, that's all shifting. And in fact, just yesterday, I was in a meeting with a group of foreign correspondent friends. We get together once a week on Zoom, and all of us have covered wars. All of us have, been in the line of fire. And we were talking about how curious it is that about 90% of the freelance reporters that have shown up to try and cover Syria and are in the most dangerous war zone right now are females. And they're in their 20s, and they're showing up because they've realized that if you want to make it in the structure of the news biz, you got to cut your teeth in a war zone, and you got to pick the most dangerous war zone on the planet. And it's curious to us. It's almost like the story doesn't matter. It's the being there and proving yourself as a female that matters. It's an interesting shift. When I was covering wars, there were hardly any women in the field at all. And now it's completely flipped.
Thanks. Interesting perspective. And Nuba, going back to the question of soft beat, and can you tell me a little bit about the fact who is in the leadership positions? I thought it was a very interesting. You sort of mentioned the word caste, and right now in the U.S. we're having quite a conversation about a new book that came out by Isabel Wilkerson about caste. Do we have caste in the U.S. like in India? And do you see that in the newsroom? Do you see that women are not getting into leadership positions? And is there some issue of caste?
Michelle, so if you got sort of the array or the bouquet of Indian channels and you switch them on, chances are you're going to find women, and you're going to find them almost clone-like. We all keep our hair straight. We're all nicely jacketed. We'll sort of be painted a couple of shades off what are our natural colors. So you're going to see, you're going to possibly get a feeling, hey, the media in India has a whole lot of women. And, as I pointed to you a little earlier when we were doing the off chat, anything you put in India is going to stick. So are you going to say, are women covering the heartbeats? Are there hardcore political reporters? Absolutely, yes. Are there women covering Kashmir, covering Northeast, covering the insurgencies? Absolutely, yes. Are there women in leadership positions? Are there women media magnets? Absolutely, yes. But every side of the story seems to be true in India. My sort of broad brush argument is this, that yes, you're going to find women in leadership positions, but you're going to find huge pay gaps. Yes, you're going to find women on the screen, but our newsrooms are not inclusive places. Gender is not the only axis on which we cut. Caste is another axis. We are coming from English-speaking sort of upper-class backgrounds, and we're going to find a place. We look a particular way, we're going to find a place on the screen. Not everyone has the same privilege in India. What's also true for some of the Indian newsrooms, so to speak, that they are boys' club. They are structurally made that way. I've encountered in many of my sort of years in the mainstream media, this strange situation that you did a primetime show, you took off your jacket and you went out with your producer and had a drink, and you realized that the next day's big story had already been discussed before we came in for our morning editorial meeting. Everyone already had an insight. And the boys club had sort of decided what was going to happen. So in that morning editorial meeting, you had to speak louder. You had to say, hey, this wasn't discussed. So there are strange sort of underbelly ways in which women are not sort of in the highlight. I just want to make one more point. I don't think it's enough for women to have a seat at the table. You've got to train us as well. We get a seat at the table and then we're almost thankful for it. Why should we be thankful for getting a seat at the table? I've spent in 20 odd years. I need to be the executive editor, if not the editor of my channel. But hey, we are so happy to just get a seat at the table. No one told me, no one makes us study what business models are. No one tells us to sort of cut our teeth in advertising. We don't get to know what the dark underbelly is because, hey, you're doing great work. You're doing a great show. You should just stick to that.
I'd like to turn to Anne to get I'll come back to you, Laura. Anne, your perspective, is that happening in Africa? And can you share your perspective about that?
I think I call it tokenism, where you give a woman a certain position and then sort of muffle her voice so that she should just be content in that little corner. And so the big boys go make decisions and they don't, they're not consulting well enough. I'm glad, in my position as an editor, that I'm in a position now to make decisions that I would want to see, in terms of content. But in my previous position, that was not the case. And it's a lot, this experience is what most journalists are going through. And most of my friends, we actually talk about it, that you will say something and you can see there's a decision that has been made without you being involved. And often, some of the stories are actually impacting you directly. And the irony that I have found in media is how we report about inequities in other companies and other industries, but we do not see ourselves in those inequities. Today, if you look at the ratio of men to women in the media, it's 2-to-1. Should we be celebrating? The answer is no. We want equal share on that table. We want to be given positions, and not just positions as tokens. We want to be able to make decisions, key decisions. That, of course, has its other side where we are talking about who owns the media. Of course, we want to be in that space and be given time to ourselves. It's not this idea of working 14, 15 hours for me. It doesn't appeal to me. I don't think we need to be encouraging women to be working for so long hours in terms of making them feel that is what is required of them to be accommodated at the table. The answer is no. Can we just have accommodating newsrooms? We can do that if we are deliberate enough.
I wanted to ask Anne a couple of things, because here in the United States, to go to the sort of the mix between the sort of caste distinctions and gender distinctions, I said about a third of journalists are female. Well, about 7% are African-American females, so a really tiny number. And when you look at the bias, yes, women towards soft beats, but African Americans are really pushed towards covering crime and urban renewal and sports, right? And if you're on the crime beat, you get a lot of bylines, but you're not going to rise up. You're just constantly dealing with the police and telling stories about murders. And if you're on the urban renewal beat, you're kind of constantly telling a depressing story about rundown cities and can we fix them up, and corruption and slums and what have you. I noticed in my time in East Africa that there's a real big difference between the Kiswahili and other African language media versus the English language media, or in the case of parts of Central Africa, the French language media, and that it's more prestigious and you earn more if you're broadcasting in English. But the vast majority of the people aren't able to follow what you're saying. They're not interested. They're listening to Kiswahili on the taxi cab radio. So how does that look now, that landscape? And when you ask questions about gender, how does that fit in with that other difference?
That's a good point you're making about the Swahili, the language dynamics in broadcast media. I've always found it baffling that the 9 o'clock news gets a lot of resources and a lot of attention from all the big bosses, as opposed to the Swahili news. And when you look at our demographics and who is watching news, actually, the Swahili speaker requires more attention. They are present, they are more actually in terms of numbers when you look at who is watching the news. And I remember, yes, I actually started as a Swahili broadcast journalist, and I knew that was my way of getting into the newsroom. If I used my Swahili, because of course, even when we come from college, most people don't want to broadcast in Swahili. It's seen as inferior. And this is the colonial inheritance, the colonial mentality that we need to dismantle. To look down upon your own language, I think it's the worst form of colonialism in my thinking, that you look down upon yourself to a point where you prefer speaking another language so that you can be accommodated. And for newsrooms to have taken this and normalized it as a culture, for me, it's unfathomable. And I made it into the medium.
Isn't it worse by gender? I mean, especially in the rural areas, aren't women more likely to be Swahili speakers and men more likely to have jobs in the city where they learn English? So it's also means that your audience is going to be more male if you're broadcasting in English. And I wonder how this plays out. I mean, I saw the same thing in India, right? That if you're doing Tamil language versus English, or you're doing other local regional language broadcasting or print in India, it's a different status than if you're doing English in India. And how does that affect the accessibility for the female listener and viewer in India?
I think more than the listener, you'll find great diversity in India. Regional newsrooms are going to cover their particular states and their local languages far better than national newsrooms are ever going to be doing that. You know, national newsrooms are obsessed and dominated by sort of power play politics, Delhi politics, focus on just the big national parties. And that's why their coverage seems, so sort of so bland and so sort of uni-focused. But many of my friends from regional languages have far more robust coverage of sort of culture, far greater coverage of rural India, far greater coverage on livelihoods, etc. You're right. You're right when you say, oh, you're an English language journalist and you're possibly going to be high up in the pecking order. But I think that would be untrue now, because there is such a proliferation of regional media. And, regional media has actually come up primarily because national media has not done their job. National media's obsession with the big metros and sort of with Delhi politics has actually led to the proliferation of a whole host of regional media. As far as the listeners are concerned, India sort of, I wouldn't have the numbers offhand, but I think English is sort of a minuscule number. No one listens to English. If you compare all our regional languages getting together, their viewership is far, far great. I did a stint with a Hindi language medium, which is much of North India. They have a local paper, and they printed from every city, and they put out a small ad. And that ad was at every nook and corner, and everyone was reading the paper in Delhi, and I'm never going to find that kind of reach. So the English language media is a bubble, and we stay in our bubble and we feel happy about it, and we think we are covering this great country. We're not even covering a fraction of it.
I would say the American equivalent of this is Spanish. So, I mean, Univision, Telemundo, the big Spanish newspapers and radio stations in the United States are incredibly important for all of the Spanish-speaking population. And the situation is that the English-speaking population majority never attempts to know what's on Telemundo, what's on Univision, what's in any of the Spanish language newspapers. They just don't pay any attention to it. The reverse is not the case. Spanish speakers do try to follow the English language news and have some idea of comparing. And I think we had one situation where a very famous news anchor, very aggressive journalist who is with Univision, in press conferences started taking on Donald Trump. And he actually got banned from the White House because of his really smart questions about immigration and the treatment of immigrants at the border and locking up women and children. And, suddenly the rest of America, the English speaking America, became aware of this guy who is the Walter Cronkite of Spanish language media in America and Mexico.
Can I bring us back to gender for a second?
Sure.
Yes.
Sorry.
No, I can. You have such great stories, but I just want to bring us back to the gender dynamic. And you mentioned mentorship and how that was important to you, and I'd like to have each of you sort of say a word about. And for Women Lift Health, that's what we're trying to do, is do mentorship. I'd like each of you to say a few words about how we go forward, how we bring women into the fray. And also, I've been really struck by the fact that women are not used as experts in the coronavirus task force or in the media the way they should be. Now, Lori, I know they turn to you, and I've actually been quoted, but it's always amongst a bevy of men. So I would really like how, when we go forward, how each of you think we can sort of think about mentorship and how to move women into a better position. Who wants to take that first?
I'll just take a quick shot because I'm the old geezer here. When I started out in journalism, a lot of the old traditions were still in place. Guys kept a bottle of whiskey in the bottom drawer of their desk and a carton of cigarettes. They would curse a blue streak, and it was sort of part of the gestalt. And they would go out after work and drink and talk together about the news and office politics. And we females were not welcome in that part of the process. And so it was the one place where management level and reporter level mixed. Was the after hours, or the guys going to the gym to work out together during lunch break and things like that. And we as women had no access. And I started.
And Anne, is that true for you? Because we have only a few more minutes before Q&A.
Well, not really. I think I was in the newsroom at a different time. So yeah, we were mixing a lot with the men, and having a mentor, for me, that really helped me a lot, having a mentor from early on in my career. So a lot of what I experienced, there was someone holding my back, and saying, we need, maybe this is something that you should consider doing. And I think one of the things that, now that you ask a way forward, I think one of the things that we need to be deliberate about is that newsrooms specifically must be ready for women. The idea that you should work for long hours because you're in a newsroom is neither here nor there. We need to shift our minds from this idea so that you can be able to be a journalist, be productive, and not necessarily be physically in an office space. COVID-19 has provided that for us, that now we have a reference point that we can be productive and still be working from home, for instance. That should be mainstreamed. Newsrooms need to accommodate the needs of women, make the ecosystem available, make the newsroom ecosystem available for women. I think that for me is really, really key.
Anuba, are there opportunities for change?
Yeah, and I think one of the opportunities for change, and Anne used the word mainstream, Michelle, I think we need to drill it down that mainstreaming gender doesn't mean adding a customary woman to your repertoire. It doesn't mean get a woman's court and that you've mainstreamed gender. It doesn't mean that. It doesn't mean that this is an issue about women. We don't need silos. We don't need silos in our papers. We don't need silos in our programs. This is not an additional angle. You're not sort of balancing some notional equation. None of that. I think all of that has to be completely thrown out of whoever's teaching journalism, and it has to be completely thrown out. So that's sort of at one level of what it means to mainstream gender. And I think the second thing is that we need to drill it down that women don't just have to be covered. They have the vision and the agency and the voice to reflect on each of the issues that are confronting. So whether it's diplomatic affairs, whether it's climate change, whether it's this particular global pandemic, yeah, I think those would be my two things. But I think this mainstreaming gender and keeping a lot of this coverage as a silo needs to stop.
Thank you. So I'm opening it up to Q&A. The first question goes to you, Lori. You mentioned reductions in pay and furloughs have had immediate impacts on this pandemic. Or pandemic reporting. What are some of the longer term challenges that COVID might have on the media industry in the US, specifically for women?
Yeah, the media industry, I think, is pretty much in crisis. If you take the Washington Post, the New York Times, the LA Times out of the equation, because these are three institutions propped up by billionaires. The Washington Post by Jeff Bezos, the LA Times by a pharmaceutical industry giant, and the New York Times by the family that has supported it forever. So if you take those big three out of the equation and look at the rest of the landscape, what's happening is that smaller local news outlets, whether they're online news outlets, newspapers, community radio stations, they're going under. And they're going under in huge numbers. We've lost 2,000 of them since 2004. And this means that information is getting concentrated into a smaller and smaller set of so-called mainstream media. And that is creating a vacuum, allowing for all the insanity, the misinformation, the bogus pseudo news, conspiracy theories, all kinds of wackiness. And I think where this is all headed, when I try to have a positive view, those brief moments when it's possible to think positive and imagine an end to COVID, and 5 or 6 years from now when we're back to some new normal, I think that Americans in particular, but I see it also in Canada and all across the UK, all across Europe, will have had a day of reckoning with the whole concept of news and information. And they will have decided they were lied to, they were cheated, and that they want reliability. They want some new system that serves as a filter. Right now, Michelle, we have all this idiocy. Let's have Congress attack Facebook and let's make Facebook take down bogus information. This is all just Band-Aids. What we're really talking about is an ultimate transformation in how this sort of filter mechanism that is journalism, that takes information from a zillion sources, compiles it, pulls it together, and then gives it back to you as a package in some form, audio, online, print, what have you. I think we're going towards a period where that whole process is going to be reconsidered, and we'll have whole new models coming forward in 4 or 5 years that will not even begin to resemble what we now do.
Thank you. Anuba, question to you. How has being a female editor impacted the opportunities you get or denied?
I should not tout myself as a good example in terms of opportunities, because I did reach a sort of particularly high level.
That's great. Stop saying that.
Yeah, that's also a problem with women at the top. Or
yeah,
I'm
going to say that to you.
You're right about that. It's been pointed out to me. But I mean, just sort of, I do come from a point of privilege. I have to say that I've had good male mentors, and I've also sought mentors. I have also gone forward and, not always looked for female mentors. I have sort of gone up to the boss and said, hey, tell me how to do this. Tell me how I should go about doing this. I think the one place where I felt denial, or where I felt that I didn't have everything that I needed or wasn't equipped, was sort of at the level of management. I just felt that I didn't have all the tools that I needed. And I think those tools were part denial and part what you pointed out, just this hesitation of moving forward. that I deserve it, that I can have it, that I have the ability to take these decisions, etc. And I think part of that has led me to be an entrepreneur. It's a completely whole different game. I've spent the last 2.5 years trying to understand business models, trying to understand viewership, trying to understand algorithms, dumbing down, making it better. And I don't think those are skill sets that either my mentors taught me or the newsroom taught me. Yeah.
Thank you. That is what we're trying to do at Women Lift Health, is give women sort of in mid to senior career those skill sets, the management, the financial during that year with coaches and mentors. Because I do.
Michelle, can I just add a little small tiny bit? And I think I should have said it at the start. Just the bit that, when I entered the newsroom, I had to toughen up. I could not afford to be someone who had a stomach ache or did not want to go into a conflict zone, because once I got that label, I would not be given the big assignments. But I think the newsroom has fundamentally changed today. And I think what Anne said is an extremely important thing. When I came into the newsroom, I was struggling to sort of keep a family together, and how the hell was I supposed to do it? I had no clue. But I think when today young women are coming into the newsroom, they want different things. And I think they're demanding different things. I also have to say that I let a lot of sort of what would be innuendo, sexual conversations pass, because I didn't want to be perceived as a problem maker. Mm-hmm. But I think that's changed in the newsroom today. Young girls are simply not accepting of that. They believe it's not okay. And I think I've struggled with that sometimes with my own team members. I say, come on, stop it. Just do your job. Don't worry about it. And I think I'm wrong there. And that's been a learning for me as more and more young women have come into the newsroom.
That's a fabulous perspective. Thank you for sharing that. And we have a question for you, which is, what are some solutions for decolonizing global media? You talked a little bit about the colonialist approach. Can you flesh that out on how we can decolonize global media?
Okay, for global media, I think we need to be aware of the power of the voice and who is giving that voice. I always felt uneasy that every time there's a big story, people parachute from somewhere else in London and the US and parachute to Kenya to come and report stories from this continent. While you actually have journalists in this continent who are capable of telling those stories. And it continued for such a long time that the images that you saw of my continent, half the time I would be wondering, hello, I don't recognize that place. Of course, are there problems in the continent? Yes, there are. Like there are problems in the United States. Are we saying that these stories are not covered? Please, yes, cover them. But there is need to use the right voices for the right stories. The idea that we still tell these stories through the lens of the other voice, I still don't get it. We have able journalists in this continent who are able to tell these stories. There will be no day that I will be parachuted to the US to go and report a story on the US. It's not going to happen. So why do we still have media houses thinking that it is okay? I don't think that's okay. And it's something that we need to have an honest conversation, especially now with what is going on in the United States. That should open up our minds and see what is it that constitutes the power of voice and the power of storytelling. For me, I would be more aligned to thinking that use the voices that are available, the voices of people who have been there in those localities who know what is really happening. That for me will be the biggest thing that you've done for this continent.
It's a wonderful way to end the Q&A session. And I think you all were sent one last question that we'd like you to really tackle. And it's really about what is the one takeaway or change you want to see to ensure better gender equality in the media. And I'll go back to Anuba, what you said. It doesn't have to be gender equality in just the equal numbers of women and men, but the correct type, and I think we shouldn't be in silos. I think that point that you made was brilliant. But better representation of the women's issues that are crucial and important, say even in COVID-19, what we talked about, the reproductive health, the informal sector, and mental health. We didn't even get into that, the impact of COVID-19 on women's mental health, which has been shown to be far more. So can you each come up with one takeaway on how we can get those issues and go forward better covered, either by men or women, our men allies, because we're not going to change this without engaging men as well. Lori, take it away. Are you muted? I think you're muted, Laura.
Well, I was just going to pass, but
oh, you can't. Well, if you want to think about it, Anuba or Anne, do you want to? A takeaway.
I'll take it. So from the media perspective, I think we need to be deliberate about women representation in the media. We must go out there and look for these women, elevate their voices, hear them, see them. Let's normalize women's voices. And I say this from a perspective of a woman who has worked in newsrooms where it was never deliberate to look out or balance stories using women's voices, even when those stories impacted women directly. Is it possible to do this? Oh, yes, it is. And if we remember when COVID-19 started, the voices that we had more were male voices. And what does it take to get women's voices on air? Honestly, what does it take? Perhaps a forum like this? Let's network. Let's normalize women's voices. That's my takeaway.
Thank you, Anne. Anuba?
I think a little bit of what Anne said, but I think a lot of my male colleagues now do it. Every time they're called to a panel, and not just on public health, but let's say on economy, on politics, on conflict, on diplomatic relations, I think my male colleagues are now sort of leading the way and saying, hey, we're not going to be in a webinar, we're not going to be in a program if the windows are all made of men. And we don't want a notional woman. It's not the anchor is a woman and you'll get one woman. It's sort of this equalizing, hey, 2, 2, 1, 2, none of that. I think that's number one, which I find absolutely fascinating, that many of my male members are now standing up and saying, here, we're not going to participate in any of these panels where women voices are just sort of notional, number one. And I think women in leadership positions with the tools, women in leadership positions so that they can make effective decisions. And just one more, let's not burden women in leadership positions. Women in leadership positions don't have to carry the burden of all women entering. Yes, they need to play a role, and yes, they are role models and all of that, but you can't expect a woman in leadership position to be doing everything.
Thank you. Lori, have you had some time to?
yes, well,
Thank you.
because of the wisdom of Anna and Anuba, my brain is now working again. If you go on Google and you put in female anchor, among the top 3 or 4 things that immediately come up are 10 of the hottest female news anchors in the world, or sexy hot news anchor. Nobody says that about male news anchors. And we see that while 2 of the 3 highest paid news anchors in the English language broadcast world are women, they both are in those positions because of some very unique scandals and situations where they were tied in with the Me Too movement, and it bumped them up through some part of the glass ceiling. Overall, I feel like the younger generation, the kids coming out of journalism schools and other university programs and entering the newsroom, such as it is, through their house or whatever they're doing now, have very low tolerance for sexism, very low tolerance for racism, very low tolerance for any of the things that we've been discussing. They get mad really fast. And the Me Too hashtag circulates in the newsroom in seconds. And by the way, it's not just the young women that are ticked off. Young men too are much more woke, as they say, than are their older generation and certainly my generation peers. So that's all positive, and that could result in something very big and transformative across the range of the industry. As again, I said before, I think the industry itself is going to transform. And I think that the nature of the gender balance, racial issues, ethnic issues, religious issues, all the hot button questions that have plagued us for so many decades. I think all of that will be part of this transformation. And we'll see a very different context in how news is judged, assessed, what sorts of sources are turned to, what sorts of voices are elevated. So, I would say we're in a transition moment, and COVID has heightened everything.
Well, thank you all for a very lively discussion, certainly eye-opening for me. And I thank our audience for really good questions.